Welcome to the IADS Retail Park, a podcast by the International Association of Department Stores. I'm Maya, and this is where we explore how retail is being rewired, from store formats and brand strategy to the customer groups nobody can afford to ignore anymore.
And I'm Anchita. One quick note before we dive in, this podcast uses AI cloned voices created with human oversight to ensure quality and accuracy.
Here at IDS Retail Park, the focus is simple: real trends, real cases, and real strategies to help you navigate an industry that's changing faster than ever. Today's topic affects every one of us, in our careers and in our personal lives: aging, and what it really means for retail.
This episode actually builds on an IDS exclusive I've been working on over the past few weeks, where I look at aging not just as a social or political issue, but as a fundamental retail strategy question. What the data shows is that we're living through a demographic shift that's bigger and faster than most forecasts anticipated. Birth rates are falling across high, middle, and low income countries, while healthcare and living conditions improve, so people are older for longer. The result is a world where the population is likely to peak this century and then start shrinking, something we haven't seen since the 14th century.
And when you zoom out, the ripple effects are huge. From labor markets and pensions to geopolitics and technology, there are even debates about whether an older world might be more peaceful, and stories about political leaders discussing extreme life extension and organ transplants. But for our listeners, the key question is, what happens to retail when a growing share of your customers are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond?
To answer that, it helps to remember where department stores started. Historically, they have been built around a kind of comfortable the middle-aged customer with some purchasing power and established tastes. But the industry has often danced around age directly. The default approach has been, how do we serve older customers without ever calling them old? In the article, I explore how that avoidance actually reinforces ageist attitudes. Now, some retailers are starting to turn that logic on its head, talking about aging openly, bringing it into campaigns, and putting ageism itself under the spotlight.
That shift is long overdue because the money is not with teenagers. Spending power today is heavily concentrated in Gen X and older generations, and that's only going to intensify as we move toward massive intergenerational wealth transfers, trillions of euros in markets like France alone. If department stores keep treating older shoppers as a side segment, they're basically ignoring the core of their future revenue base.
Which brings us to ageism, because that is really the underlying issue. Ageism shows up in subtle and not so subtle ways, dismissing older people at work, downplaying health concerns, assuming slower tech adoption, or treating older adults as background characters in social settings. In retail, it looks like only hiring young energy on the floor, ignoring older workers in diversity policies, and designing experiences that quietly tell older shoppers, this isn't really for you.
And once you factor in gender, the picture becomes even more stark. Women often hit a wall in their 40s and 50s, being labeled old while men of the same age are still seen as experienced or even in their prime. Nowhere is that more visible than in beauty, where anti-aging has been a central storyline for decades, with products pushed on women as early as their 20s. A recent survey even found that almost all respondents listed aging as a primary beauty concern.
In the piece, I describe this as a double bind of visibility. On one hand, the industry claims to celebrate older women. On the other, it sets incredibly narrow criteria for who qualifies. In response to criticism, we've seen the rise of so-called pro-aging narratives, brands swapping anti-aging for rejuvenation, revitalization, or ageless. The language is softer, but the underlying ideal still points toward youth. At the same time, claims are getting more medical. High-end skincare like La Prairie's Pure Gold Revitalizing Essence promises intense cellular renewal for skin, showing signs of aging linked to hormonal change. The entire pitch frames aging as something to manage or correct rather than a stage of life to inhabit fully.
This medicalization trend stretches beyond skincare into injectables, weight loss drugs, and a whole ecosystem of biohacking routines. And yet, even when brands include older icons, think Mae Musk, Isabella Rossellini, Helen Mirren, there is often a sense that we are still looking at a very curated version of aging. It feels like a narrow window of who is allowed to grow older in public.
Yeah, you're right about that, Maya. Pamela Anderson's barefaced Fashion Week appearance and El Palacio de Hierro's campaign with Carmen Del Orifice pushed the conversation a little further, and they resonated because they felt less processed, but they still live in a polished frame of exceptional aging. Then AI arrives and turns the pressure up again. When brands use AI generated elderly models who are improbably toned, smoothed out, and almost wrinkle free, it sends a clear message. Even aging is expected to pass through a perfection filter. In the article, I argue that this is inclusivity in appearance, but not yet inclusivity in practice.
So we end up in this strange loop. Aging is more visible in campaigns than it used to be, but only in very controlled and aspirational forms. Inclusivity becomes another marketing storyline rather than a deeper structural shift. The encouraging news is that parallel trends around longevity and nostalgia are giving retailers a more constructive way into the conversation.
That's where the story becomes a lot more hopeful. Longevity is emerging as one of the defining wellness themes. Younger consumers are thinking about healthy aging much earlier, investing in cellular supplements, wearables, and even epigenetic testing to extend their health span, not just their lifespan. Products like Khloe Kardashian's protein popcorn speak to this blend of indulgence and health consciousness, while menopause care is finally coming out of the shadows thanks to brands built specifically for women in midlife. In the exclusive, I describe this shift as moving from fighting age to designing a longer middle of life.
That sits alongside sustainability and conscious consumption, especially in developing markets where wellness, longevity, and environmental impact are increasingly interlinked. At the same time, nostalgia is having a real moment. Brands like Levi's and Polaroid tap into a version of the past that feels slower, more tactile, and more understandable than the present. Younger shoppers are drawn to the aesthetics and stories of eras they never actually lived through.
Which is exactly where older adults come back into focus in a positive way. They carry first hand memories of those eras music, fashion, politics, everyday rituals, and that lived experience has value for younger generations who are looking for roots and context. In the article, I refer to older consumers as cultural custodians. Age becomes a bridge rather than a barrier when their stories are invited into the room.
Department stores are uniquely placed to make that bridge visible in a physical space. Le Bon Marché's Rock and Roll exhibition is such a strong example. The store transformed into a celebration of rock culture, with vintage fashion, concert merch, vinyl corners, immersive installations, and even a rock motel of themed rooms dedicated to icons from Elvis to Bowie. Sensor driven narration added layers of context and storytelling.
What made it powerful is not just the scenography, but what happened between people. On the shop floor, you could see grandparents and parents guiding younger family members through the rooms, explaining who these artists were and sharing their own concert stories. It turned into an intergenerational learning moment rather than just a visual spectacle. In the exclusive, I call this designed serendipity, a retail setting that quietly encourages storytelling between age groups.
Around the same time, Galerie Lafayette gave space to a curation by Sophie Fontanelle, a French fashion journalist who has been very public about going gray and talking honestly about wrinkles, filters, and the pressure to look young. Seeing her image and voice woven into catalogs and in store visuals subtly challenged the eternal youth narrative, even when the very same pages still featured classic anti aging skincare claims.
Those two cases show that progress is uneven, but they also prove that department stores can use their cultural role to move the needle. Now add the economic layer. In France alone, assets worth more than 9 trillion euros are expected to pass from baby boomers to the next generation by 2040. Many grandparents already prioritize spending on their grandchildren over themselves. and Gen X remains a solid consumption group in its own right. In the article, I describe this as the intergenerational dividend, a blend of emotional influence and financial power.
Department stores have long been the stage for family rituals, holiday windows, back to school shopping, special occasion outfits. The opportunity now is to design those experiences intentionally so that events, services, and product edits invite different generations in together rather than by accident.
And that also means taking a critical look at what a youth strategy really delivers. Younger audiences are essential for long term relevance, but the strongest strategies are intergenerational. They respect the service, accessibility, and trust that older shoppers value, while adding in the discovery, wellness, and omnichannel experiences that Gen Z and millennials expect as standard. When you weave those together, you get deeper loyalty across age groups instead of constantly starting from scratch with the newest cohort.
Department stores have the square footage and the heritage to make this real. They can host cultural programming, create quiet corners and lively hubs, introduce health and wellness services, and curate both nostalgic and forward looking content in the same ecosystem. Once aging is treated as a permanent, visible part of the customer base, not a seasonal theme, it stops being a problem segment and becomes a guiding principle for design.
So the strategic mandate is pretty clear. In a world where people are living longer and the population curve is shifting, age inclusion cannot sit on the sidelines. It needs to be embedded in hiring, marketing, space planning, service design, and brand partnerships. The retailers who see aging as a driver of innovation rather than something to mask will be the ones that stay relevant as longevity becomes the new normal. And for anyone who wants the full framework, the complete IADS exclusive pulls together the data, examples, and strategic tools in much greater detail.
That sums it up beautifully. Aging isn't a side story, it is the story of the next few decades of retail. And department stores, if they choose to lean into this, can become the places where generations genuinely see and understand each other.
Thanks for listening to this episode of IADS Retail Park. If this conversation sparked new thinking about your customers, your teams, or your store formats, it's a great moment to bring those questions into your next strategy discussion.
For more insights and updates, follow us on LinkedIn at International Association of Department Stores. Check out our Substack and visit our website for additional resources and exclusives.
And if you'd like to explore the full article behind today's episode, you will find the link to my exclusive in the episode description. Until next time, keep designing for the customers you have today and the ones we are all going to become.